G'day everybody and welcome to this week's episode of the Scale HQ podcast. This week, you are going to be listening to me as a guest being interviewed on Jackson Millan's podcast. Jackson is from Aureus Financial. He is also known as the Wealth Mentor. He's transformed the lives of thousands of business owners. Between them all, they have created $2 billion in wealth. He does wealth planning, tax planning, sort of scaling. Like he's coming to businesses from a financial aspect, from a, originally kind of accounting and wealth management and wealth building aspect. And today he's asking me questions about what it takes to make that transition from being a business owner to becoming a CEO of your own company, moving from a business to a company, professionalizing, and how to think about the right metrics from a financial perspective if you want to build towards some kind of an exit, so that you at least are building with sellability in mind, even if you don't plan to sell or you choose not to sell, that you're actually building something where you've got the options and also something that can ultimately work without you being focused on it every single day, which of course lots of us want. So please enjoy me being interviewed on Jackson Millan's podcast today. Get amongst it. Welcome to the Scale HQ podcast, your weekly injection of tips and insights into the secrets of scaling. I'm your host, Sean Steele, and I am obsessed with figuring out how to help founders just like you who are creating real value in the world to scale up so they can fulfill their potential. I do that each week by interviewing founders who successfully scaled, experts in all the areas of business that you need to master, interviews with founders who are still on the way up, and 10-minute tutorials and reflections from me based on my experiences in creating $100 million in revenue for 4 other companies over 8 years. So let's dive in and see what gems we can find together on this week's episode of the Scale HQ podcast.
All right, g'day guys, this is Jackson Millan, the Wealth Mentor, and we're here for another episode of the Financial Freedom Secrets Show. And I have a new friend of mine, Sean Steele here from Scale HQ, and Sean's got a wealth of experience around growing and scaling businesses, of being a true idea of being a CEO, of creating true value in enterprises, and ultimately working towards very profitable exits, which many of us ultimately should be working towards in small business land, but often gets placed on the back burner. And these are really the cheat codes of wealth creation, guys. This show is all about empowering you with the tools that you need to create financial freedom, but very rarely are these types of things discussed. And I think for many small business owners, it becomes a mystery of this idea of capital allocation, of creating intrinsic value, and ultimately about creating, working towards liquidity events. So I'm very much looking forward to sharing some wisdom with you on this episode. So Sean, thanks for joining us, mate. How you doing?
My pleasure. The raspy version of Jackson today and the slightly less raspy version of Sean.
Yes, exactly. I think that we'll even out the both, mate. So hopefully you'll do the majority of the talking today, so I can rest my my vocal cords. But mate, let's start right at the very beginning, Sean. Tell us a little bit about you and your story and what got you to where you are, mate.
Well, look, I grew up in sales. Like many people, you don't really plan to be in sales. You sort of find yourself there. Found that I was pretty good at it. And I knew actually pretty early on in my early 20s that I wanted to be a CEO. So I was really keen. So I didn't grow up as a founder. Fundamentally, I grew up through sort of the corporate ladder to become a professional CEO. And loved sales, loved leadership, sought out mentors and really asked them to challenge and guide me through to sort of take me through to that level of learning. Got to my first CEO gig in my early 30s, and in my last CEO role, I'd built $100 million in revenue over the previous couple of companies, and I was building a portfolio of education businesses. But what I loved about that journey was that I was buying other 7-figure businesses, sometimes 8-figure businesses. And my job was to buy the business, mentor the founder and their leadership team, or replace the founder and their leadership team, and then essentially help them get the growth strategy right, optimize the business model, get their execution in place, and then buy the next business, so that we would essentially grow the value of the enterprise faster than the value of each individual one could on their own.
I love that, mate. So why acquisition, mate? Why not build the businesses yourself?
It's an interesting path. I think, as I was growing up the corporate ladder, I always knew I was going to want to build my own thing, but I didn't really know what it was or when it was. And I was being challenged like every day, every month, every year, which I loved. Like I was growing so quickly. I was super into my own learning and development. And because it was challenging, I found it really rewarding. And I knew at some point I would shift out of working for other people. And I think,
Sure.
that ran its course probably in my late 30s, when I realized even as the CEO, you've still got a boss, you've still got a, chairman of the board, you've still got shareholders. And actually I got to the stage where I was like, not keen to have that anymore. But I learned so much through that period. And creating value in an enterprise through acquisitions is an incredible way to create wealth for an organization, for the shareholders, ultimately for yourself if it's your business.
Yeah, but I'm big on acquisitions, mate. I can't say that I'm as experienced as yourself, but I love it and I'm learning every single day. And you're right, the ability to kind of fast track your trajectory, be able to manufacture value through those acquisitions is really second to none. But it is quite complicated, and I'm sure we'll touch on this a little bit. But what I'd really
Sure.
love to kind of talk about, mate, is this idea of being a CEO. I think many of us
Mm-hmm.
have this idea of what a CEO means at the kind of top end of town when we deal with publicly listed companies or multinational billion-dollar
Mm.
businesses. But I think it's a little bit vague when we talk about this kind of small to medium enterprise land. So
Yeah,
from your perspective, mate, what does it mean to be a CEO?
that's a great question. I think if almost you think of it like not a pendulum. Can't think of the right word today, but there's a broad range of what it means to be a CEO when you're starting out as a CEO and when you are as a CEO with significant resources to kind of go behind you. But I think the starting point is to think about what is the job of the CEO. Like ultimately, the job of the CEO is to get the strategy and the vision right. The job of the CEO is to hire the best people and then spend their time empowering those people, getting stuff out of their way so that they can actually succeed, like showing them what success means and looks like, and then getting stuff out of their way so they can achieve that. And then finally, to make sure the business always has enough capital in place to achieve its goals and to execute on that strategy, whether that's organic cash or cash from some other source. So it's like if you sort of start with that as your endpoint, then it's about making small incremental steps towards that as the business gets bigger. At the starting point, it's shifting out of, I think, thinking of your business as a business and starting to think of it as a company. And there
Yes.
is a big difference between having a business that makes money, which is awesome, and a company, which means you're organized, you're professionalizing, you're growing up, you actually have reports that you understand. You start to, think about where your team's going to need to be in 3 years and starting to hire the right people ahead of that. Like it's starting to make those small shifts towards thinking like I'm going to be a company owner. This is an asset of mine, not just this is a business that I run and people like to pay me money and it's profitable, which is great. And you have to start there, but then you slowly shift out of it.
It makes a lot of sense, mate. And look, in your experience, how many owners are actually acting and operating by that definition of being a CEO when you first interact with them, mate?
Oh, very few, very few. I think most people don't give any credence to strategy, or they think because the business is profitable that they've figured out strategy. And so they may have got product market fit, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that the way they're building the business means that they're going to have a competitive advantage in sort of 3 to 5 year times. And that's all strategy is. Like if you really
Yes.
boil it down to it, what is strategy? Strategy is future competitive advantage. It's doing something now that is, it's a bit of toil, it's a bit of sacrifice, it's not short-term return, it's like medium-term stuff. Like what are the 2 to 3 things that you're going to double down on that you're going to be very happy you did in 5 years' time because you can turn around and you will have a moat around you. You will have a competitive advantage versus your competitors. That's the strategy bit. And so some founders have naturally figured that out and some haven't yet. So I don't see many that start with that. I think most business owners are very in tune with cash. But they don't often use debt they often haven't figured out probably the most important metric in my view, which is what is their cost of acquisition versus the profit contribution that every one of those customers makes.
Yes.
So that when you understand that ratio and assuming that the profit contribution is materially higher than the cost of acquiring the customer, then the question is, well, if I had access to more capital, how much faster could I go? Because ultimately, if I put $1,000 in and I get $3,000 to the bottom line, that's a pretty good ratio. And now I'm actually limited by the capital and how well I can lead and build the right team. So I think that's a really interesting shift that almost sort of signifies the mindset of going from business owner to company owner who's thinking about it like an asset, going, oh, no, I've got an asset where I stick $1,000 in, I get $3,000 out the other side. How much faster could I build this? What ways could I build this? Who else could help me build this?
You talk my language because this is the stuff that we've had to work out for ourselves and we try and help our clients with in terms of their financial strategy of knowing your numbers. Because I think, look, most people throw away that line. of, oh, I need to know my numbers in my business, but there's a
Yes,
lot of numbers to know. And some
there
numbers
is.
are far more important, like, for example,
Mm,
understanding that cost of acquisition versus that lifetime customer value, or how much profit does each client contribute compared to what it costs you to acquire them. And
mm,
it means that so many business owners are walking in the dark financially,
yeah.
right? Is it an education thing, mate? Or is it that they are so overwhelmed by lower value tasks, they just haven't pivoted into that mindset of a CEO? Or is it something completely else entirely?
I think one of the things that I think it's an education thing.
Mm,
Ultimately, you don't know what you don't know. So if you've never
sure.
done it before, if you've never been in a business that's exited before, or you've never been close enough to the table where those decisions are getting made, and you've never been involved in that process, you just can't know what you don't know. However, any one of us could jump on ChatGPT right now and go, what is it, what is an investor looking for when they buy your business? What are the factors that drive evaluation? Like if you start with the end in mind, it
Yeah.
starts to get you out of I'm just consumed with all the busyness of stuff. And it starts to
Mm,
get you thinking about 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years out. And you know what? The interesting thing is you may never choose to sell. Like if you've got a golden goose laying eggs, then I know plenty of business owners who sell too early. They maybe sell for 3 times their profit, and then 2 years later they're scratching themselves and going, hang on a second, if I'd actually hung on to that business for 3 years, I would have had the same amount of money in my bank account as I just made in the sale, but now I've got no business and no cash generating asset.
yes.
So, but I think if you build with the assumption that you're going to build something that's sellable, you build a better business, you build a company, you build infrastructure, you build rhythms, you build stuff that actually a buyer really cares about.
Yeah.
And that way you always have options. You can sell down to management, you can sell out completely, you have different kinds of exit options available to you. But if you never start with that end in mind, you just kind of hoping that at some point randomly at some day someone's going to knock on the door and offer you a bunch of money, and they might, but actually you'd be in a much stronger negotiating position if you reverse engineered what success looks like for an exit and then work backwards to now, however long it takes.
Makes so much sense, mate. And look, and I think it's a great position to be in, particularly if you don't ever want to sell, like myself. I have no intention to sell the business. We want
Mm,
to work towards some sort of liquidity event, whether that be a listing on the market or a partial sale to PE or something like that. But it's
hmm
usually just to get access to capital so we can fund more acquisitions and more growth, so I can see how far I can take
hmm
this thing. But
Yeah.
I still have the philosophy of building my business for sale, because it allows
Mm.
me to understand from the opposite end what what's the emotions of being a vendor, and then how do I understand what the buyer is looking for, because I feel that also helps me as an acquirer, so I can then play the game of negotiation. But I don't think most people
Totally.
think about it like that and haven't gone through the process. So, mate, what
No.
are the key things that a buyer is looking for that that essentially is that a business is saleable, it's valuable in their
Mm.
eyes, and an owner is going to be able to get the best possible outcome for their business?
The thing that's the thing that you got to think about. So when I think about me as an investor buying
Mm,
businesses, how am I evaluating? If you think about, everyone talks about the multiple of profit that you're going to get on the sale.
yeah,
So depending on the size of your business, depending on the industry, depending on a million things, someone is going to ascribe a multiple of profit. But why do they say your business is worth 2 times or 3 times or 5 times or 10 times? Why do they say that? Well, it's their evaluation of the growth opportunity, it's their confidence in the growth opportunity and their confidence that they can mitigate any risks that are coming up. So if
yeah,
you think about that and you kind of reverse engineer it, what is the biggest risk that you should be focused on first? The biggest risk that is going to reduce the multiple you get paid is your operation in the business.
yeah,
Like ultimately, if you want to have any kind of exit options and you are deeply integrated into the operations of that business, you're deeply integrated into the business development requirements, how as a person who's looking to buy your business, could I get comfortable that if you once you've got a whole bag of money in your pocket, that you're not going to just take the foot off, you're going to spend your time in the Bahamas, like all of a sudden the business is going to die. So essentially, I'm going to bring my multiple down that I'm likely to pay you because my risk just went up, if that
yeah.
makes sense. So if you almost reverse engineer it from risk, the question is, what are all the things that could go wrong in this business? And how do I systematically take each one of those away over the next 5 years? Well, that means I'm going to have some capable leadership so that I've de-risked myself. I'm going to have some systems that are scalable so that they can have confidence that it'll keep growing. I'm going to have delivery that can continue to scale. I'm going to have a scalable sales and marketing engine that they think they can continue to crank up. So it's that balance between How do you give them confidence in the growth opportunity? And how do you help them reduce their risk? If you can do both of those things, an investor will pay you more for your business, full stop.
Makes so much sense. And I think that's the thing, right? This is the reason why building your business for sale is so important, because if you're not building your business for that, you're building a business for ego. And then in many cases, founders end up creating more jobs for themselves so they feel important. So it's the polar opposite of building a business for sale. And I'm sure you see that all of the time as well. And
I had a great example of that today. Caught up with an old friend of mine who was a marketing director from my company. He joined a business that looked like it was going great. It was a pretty sort of fast growing, small business. Like I would say, small business, probably 1 to 10 million, something like that.
yep.
And but it didn't work out, and he's moved on to another company. I said, what happened in this business? He said, well, the founder thought that he wanted to have a marketing director, but he wasn't willing to let go of anything. So I was like, what am I doing here? And that was such a great example of a founder probably building for ego.
Yes.
He knows he needs resources. So he's hired a marketing director, but he is absolutely unwilling to make the shift from business owner to company owner. The company owner and the CEO would say, I need to tell this person what success looks like what we need to achieve, why we need to achieve it, and then I need to give them some space on the how they get there. If I try to micromanage the how, then I'm always going to be managing everybody's priorities, everybody's tasks, and that is absolutely exhausting and the fastest way to burn out for a founder.
Yeah. Makes so much sense, mate. So assuming that we're building this business towards sale, even though it may not be a sale, we've touched on some of the metrics that we need to focus on, one being the client acquisition to the profit contribution. What are some of the other most important metrics that a business should be tracking to use as basically their measure of success? Are they actually heading in the right direction? Are they building towards the optimal outcome? What do you typically look for, mate?
Yeah. There's probably two others that would be really big in my focus. One is actually the level of profitability versus the revenue. So what is your EBITDA? What is your sort of profit before depreciation and amortization as a percentage of your revenue? And the reason I say that, I mean, that seems really simple. Everyone wants to have a higher profit business, but I can tell you, I know a lot of founders who have 15, 20, 30, $40 million businesses with somewhere between 5 and 10% EBITDA, and they are running stressful businesses. It is stressful. Like they do not have the available cash to hire the best people, to invest in their growth, to take on the next new product, to invest in that system. It's a really stressful experience. And I know plenty of founders, and I mentor numerous ones who have $3 million, $4 million, $5 million, $6 million businesses that do 40%, 45%, 50%, 55% EBITDA, and they are so relaxed. They love their businesses. They have heaps of options. They've got loads of cash in the bank. They're just comfortable. And I think, so right up front, I think Alex Hormozy said it best, he said, are you investing 10 out of 10 effort in a 2 out of 10 opportunity? Like, how profitable can this business be? If you're running a business that you can't see any path to 30% plus EBITDA, then I think you actually really have to ask the question, am I in the right business, or am I thinking about it the right way? Get some help, get some mentoring, find some advisors, find somebody who's in your industry in a different country running a better business than you, and figure out how to make it more profitable. Otherwise, it's always going to be a hard graft for you. So I would say your overall profit percentage is a really key one. And the last metric, this is probably not necessarily one metric, but more a philosophy of metrics, is you mentioned before that founders often, when they go, I need to know my numbers, so they start getting fixated on the reporting of what's just happened. And so great, they've got a profit and loss statement. They're looking at how much they spent on X, Y, Z. You have to do that. Absolutely, it's important and it's valuable. But the most important metrics are the leading indicators. So what are the activities that have to happen in my business on a systematic basis, which I know that if those metrics are happening in the right way every day, every week, the revenue will take care of itself, the profit will take care of itself, like everything else will work. So rather than focusing on the outcomes and then looking back in the past, you've really got to ask yourself, what are the leading indicators of future success? So for example, if you've got a sales team, you really need to be completely dialed into how many leads they're getting, or how many phone calls they're making, how many appointments they're generating, not just focused on they produce this number of dollars this month. That's great. But actually, you're already behind the 8 ball if that's where your focus is. So the question is, are you really focused on leading indicators? Have you thought about those in every area of your business? that's going to create a future impact, because then you can get a really fast sense before things go wrong or where you can optimize and charge things up. But I see a lot of founders do the opposite. They focus on the outcomes, and then they put a lot of pressure on people when people aren't achieving outcomes, rather than looking at the inputs or the leading indicators and focusing on how they can do those better and more consistently.
Makes so much sense, mate, because you've got to get out ahead of it. And I think what I see in a lot of these founders and owners is that they put pressure on the team and they go, ah, stuff it, I could do a better job myself. And then they jump back in and roll their
Jump back
sleeves
in.
up, and it just and
Yeah.
that's just not how it's solved, right? Because one of the points that you mentioned of the key parts of being a CEO is really how do you mentor those leaders in the team? How do you put
Mm,
the right people in the right seat on the bus and allow
mm,
them to drive the outcomes forwards? And
yeah.
that's not going to happen when you micromanage them or undermine their ability to do their job.
Mm.
Is that common, mate?
It's super common, and I've got a tip for founders, because I think you always hear people talk about you've got to get A players, you've got to get A players, and
Yes.
that is true. Like if you have a business full of B players, it's a road to burnout, having to manage everybody, having to make all their decisions for them. It's not actually going to free you up. However, I think people often construe the idea of A players as like top shelf, high cost, have to be, best in industry kind of players, as opposed to people
Mm.
they can groom. However, as a founder, you're going to have grown up with some discipline expertise in something. And yes, as a CEO, you have to kind of know enough about all the parts of the business to be dangerous, is the way I think about it.
Yes.
Like you have to know enough so that you can't have the wool pulled over your eyes. However, you're never going to be the expert in that functional area. So let's just say you take on a young and up and coming marketing manager, and you think they've got heaps of potential. You can see their leadership character, but they're still lacking some technical depth in marketing, which you don't have. The way to help them continue to grow and add more value to your business is to find an external part-time, like a couple of hours a month or a day a month or whatever, like external marketing director who does know how to professionally develop that individual, so that you're building your internal capability. You're not using an agency where you're now reliant on somebody else. You're building
Yes.
your internal capability in your business. You're leveraging some sort of part-time, low commitment, probably high cost per hour, but high
Yep.
quality strategy work, mentoring work for your person, so they can add more value in your business. They love it because they want to grow and learn. You can't
Mm.
offer them that development, but it's a much more effective way of getting a lower cost resource paired with a higher cost external mentor and growing your own internal capability in your business.
That is a phenomenal strategy. And I know I've been guilty of this myself, right? I've always been a big believer, you hire people based on their values and then teach them everything else. But I
Mm-hmm.
don't know everything. And you're right, I know enough to
Mm,
be dangerous, but you need to work out how do you expedite their capability so they can insert those high performance values along with the high performance skill set that can get the outcome that you're
yeah.
after.
Because they
That
also
I think it's a
become a
great reminder.
retention risk otherwise, right? Like people who
Yes.
are good are super hungry to learn. And so the
Mm.
moment that they are outpacing you in terms of your technical depth, you need to make sure they're still learning. Otherwise, they're going to go and find somewhere else where they can learn. So yes, they want to perform, um, but they need to be challenged. And they need to be learning all the time. And that's where you lose great people, is your
Makes sense.
inability to keep them challenged and keep them learning. So you've got to find a way to do that. And external resources can be super helpful, just to partner people up a little bit.
Love that. Awesome. Look, more on this team piece. Look, I think the biggest challenge, and I know I've experienced this myself in that transition from being a technician to being a manager to being a leader, to being basically the CEO, the captain of the ship, is that stakeholder engagement of really how to bring the best out of your leadership team, out of your managers. So,
Mm.
what really should be the role of a CEO in the context of mentoring the team, and what should that look like at the higher end of town, mate?
I think it's easy to assume that the more senior a role, that the more they should be able to determine what success looks like on their
Mm.
own. But actually, no matter how senior, like I've hired many 200, 250,000, 300,000, $350,000 roles, reporting to me. And in every one of those, they still want to know what success looks like to you. And
Yes.
so I have a really simple template that I use with all of my founders, that I mentor, called a success profile. And the success profile is not a job description full of tasks, which is what most people do. They give you a job description and 3 pages worth of micro tasks, which is not what success, it's not what you actually really, yes, they may do some of those things, but you need to teach them, this is what actually success looks like for you here's the lead indicators that I'm going to be really focused on that I want to see you succeeding in. Here's the lag indicators or the outcomes that I want you to generate. Here's the big projects I want you to get done. If you can do those things, I'm going to feel like that's successful. They need to understand what those things are and why, not all the task levels. Like they need to figure out what the tasks are to get there. You need to stay elevated. So with a senior person, you've still got to do that. And then it's really important to me that those success profiles are shared across the leaders. Actually, they're shared publicly in the business for anyone who wants to see them, because otherwise you end up with a bunch of leaders all running their own show, and that does not work. That creates huge problems, lots of animosity, lots of walls, lots of inefficiency if they're all running off in silos. So how do you do that? You design success profiles where they all are sort of forced to look at each other's to go, okay, I know what's important to Jackson, who's running sales, and I'm running marketing or operations or whatever. Those success profiles need to be aligned. You need to be able to look at them all and go, if we all achieve these things, are we going to achieve the organization's goals and what the company believes success looks like? If that's a yes, that's how you keep them all aligned and recognizing what other people's priorities are. So now you are focused on, yes, empowering them individually with whatever it is that they need, which is always different for every person, but you're also uniting them as a group, making sure they realize there is no game where they run off and do their own thing. They have to be working, they have to be starting to think and act like the CEO as individuals. And that was a huge shift for me. I remember in my first kind of executive role, I had a coach who said, hey, Sean, you're seen as like the next managing director, you're ticking all the leadership boxes, except it's known that if something's in your way, that you will pretty much just bulldoze through it to get the job done. And you have to ask yourself, are your peers going to support you to become the new managing director? Because actually those are the people that you'll be leading. And I was like, oh my goodness. She said, you need to shift out of I'm a leader of a function to the job of all of the leaders of these functions are to think and act like the CEO. So actually all of you need to be thinking with the whole business as your first lens of any decision that you make before you think of your own function. And that was like a total transformation for me personally and for the other leaders in our business. And it really helped sort of bond and unite us.
I love that, mate. That's fantastic. And look, it is an evolution. And I think we need to shift these lenses over time, because the lenses that you measure your success by are never going to be the same at any kind of level of your business growth. And I think that's something that I've wrestled with a lot. And it's going to be an ongoing work in progress as that continues to shift and change. And mate, assuming that we've got these kind of foundational parts in place, right? We've stepped up to being a CEO. We're doing those things. We've got the right team who've got the right measure of success. We're tracking the right metrics, and we're in the right business. We're backing the right opportunity.
Yes, the right horse, yeah.
We start looking at acquisitions. When should businesses be looking to acquire? When do you believe it makes sense?
That's an excellent question. I think it makes sense when your leadership team is capable of running your existing business pretty much without you. Like that you could pretty much, dial into a meeting, you could spend half a day a week on the existing business and know that actually all the things that you've set in place, the way they make decisions, all that, you've got access to all the information you need so that the business never goes off track without you knowing. You've got capable individuals who are running their functions well. And because don't forget, when you acquire a business, depending on your acquisition strategy, the assumption is probably going to be that you're going to buy a business that's going to integrate into your business somehow. It creates a whole bunch of extra work. It creates a lot of work for you, and it's also going to have an impact on your existing leaders. So they need to be strong and they need to be capable. And so I think the risk is, yes, it's an amazing way to build, like if we talk about the most basic part of this sort of formula, if your business does $1 million in profit and you can buy, let's say your business is worth 4 times, but you can buy a business at 4 times profit, and you can buy a business at 2 times profit, and all of a sudden you've made immediate value on day one, because now the combination of both of those profits together are now worth 4 times instead of 2 times. Okay, so you make immediate money, but all of the money that you can make in an acquisition is won or lost in the way that you integrate or don't integrate that business successfully. It's all in the sort of onboarding, the way that you treat the people, the way the cultures come together, the way you create clarity around who's leading what, like all of the people stuff is actually where most of the value is won or lost. And therefore you need capable people to ensure that, they're also going to be able to do a good job when you bring this new business under the fold. So I think, and that's making the assumption that you are going to integrate the businesses somehow. Yes, you can build portfolios of companies that have no ties to each other whatsoever. They're just a bunch of business. That's completely fine and reasonable. But you can create more value by doing integrations, but it takes a little bit of time. So yeah, I wouldn't be doing it before I was sufficiently profitable and I had a capable team running the core business where I could take my eye off the ball and not be super worried about the core business.
Yep, it's super important, mate. I've seen so many business owners chase a shiny opportunity, which in some cases is a really good opportunity, but they end up
Mm,
splitting their bandwidth across two businesses, meaning they're spending half the amount of time as their competitors, who are
mm,
just going to run rings around them. And then they
that's
end up
true.
shifting focus from one to the next. And where one's doing well,
Yeah.
the other suffers, or potentially both suffer. And
Mm,
it's just a sequencing thing.
mm,
Look, acquisitions aren't easy. There's a lot of work
no,
involved, and I think you hit the nail on
there
the head.
is.
If you don't get
You would
the
know.
integration right,
Yeah.
you can blow the whole thing up in your face and erode a whole lot more value than you're aiming to make.
100%. And probably the other thing that I've learned is, when you start looking at acquisitions and you're thinking about how you're going to create value in the business, I think the sort of trick for the newbies is that most people focus on revenue synergies, meaning
Mm,
I'm going to be able to sell my product to their customers. They're going to be able to sell my product. Sorry, I'm going to sell my products to their customers. They're going to sell my product to the other way around. I think I'm
yep.
saying the same thing twice. You know what I'm talking about. But essentially, everyone's focused on, I'm going to create so much more value through the revenues. And it is always heaps harder than you think to create revenue
Yes.
synergies. It's always harder. It's like the small details, like, okay, their sales team's not incentivized to, they don't really care about your business, some new parent owner, and they don't really want to sell your products to their customers, or they're not incentivized in the right way, or it's just a bit of a awkward handover, or the brands don't fit very well together, a million different reasons. But
Mm,
what does go straight to the bottom line is bottom line synergies, meaning costs that you can take out of the business. And so I'm not
yes.
suggesting that the best strategy is to run in and strip out all the costs. I'm not saying that either. However, if you've got duplicate roles, beautiful. Maybe you can do more with one person than you can with the two people side by side who are doing the same job. Great. Or I remember we bought a business doing 35 million in revenue, and it was doing, I mean, you would love this, Jackson. It would have been the scariest P&L you'd probably ever seen. It was forecast to do, my investment committee proposal was that it was forecast to do $100,000 in profit off $35
Wow.
million in revenue.
Oh, gosh. What a waste of
100,000.
time.
And I was thinking, wow, if we get this wrong, we are going to be burning millions of dollars very quickly because, lose even 15% of the revenue and the
There's
cost
not
base
much
stays the
meat on
same,
the
you're in
bone.
real trouble. Exactly. So it was all about the people, but we involved the people in the business we just acquired in the profit optimization, in the cost savings.
Mm,
We had like Power BI dashboards. Everybody was focusing on saving money everywhere they possibly could because the communication was, hey guys, you're not profitable. And actually that $100,000 represents the total amount that I can invest in the growth of this business for new products and new services and new jobs and new roles and all things you want.
yes.
So we need to create profitability together. And we agreed what the profit target should be. And then we all got involved in actually trying to find it. And it was amazing. It actually really united the culture of the business together because people were transparent with them for the first time. So I think there's definitely a lot of, and we created $2.5 million on the bottom line in the first 6
Phenomenal.
months.
Right.
From $100,000. So, but that was all cost savings. So it was actually far easier than the top line stuff, which took a few years to really start to kick in.
Makes so much sense. And look, it's a harsh reminder for me because naively, my first few acquisitions were all about those revenue synergies and the
Mhm.
capturing share of wallet. And you're right,
Mhm.
it's like pulling teeth. And it's the
Harder.
last thing. It is harder. It was the
Yeah.
last thing to come off out of everything. And
Mm.
I think this further illustrates, mate, to anybody listening to this who's interested in acquisitions. And look, once again, we're not here to scare you out of this. But this is the
No.
difference between building passive wealth outside of your business, which can be set
Yeah.
and forget, and
Mm.
building active wealth. And when you acquire a
True.
business, there's probably nothing more active. It is going to
Mm.
consume all of your bandwidth for months,
Hmm.
potentially years, in order to
Yeah.
realize that value. But how you're rewarded for that value creation when you get it right is tremendous. So,
Yeah.
so it's very, very exciting.
Totally.
Well, mate, this has been phenomenal. I'd love to just dive into a little bit because we've covered so much ground here. Mate, like, who's an ideal client for you? Who do you ideally want to be working with that lights you up and that you feel you can add the most value to, Sean?
I love working with founders that are past $1 million who have a services business, sometimes software as part of it, but usually services. And they know they're on the kind of cusp of something special. They know they're sort of on the brink of something great, but they're starting to face those significant decisions because all the founders I work with have never done this before. They've never built a business. They've never run a business bigger than the one they've got today. The business is working. I don't tend to find people come to me if their businesses are broken and need fixing. The business is going well, the business is profitable, it's growing, but as the business gets more and more people in it, the consequences get bigger. I've never led a team this big. I don't really know how to hire the right people. I don't want to have like huge pain and big mistakes. Like I know I'm still going to face some, but I want to get to whatever my outcome is as fast as possible with the least amount of pain. That's why people come to me. And the reason I do this is when I was buying these 7-figure businesses, I could see so much value being left on the table, like people with great businesses, but actually had they done a few other things right in the preceding 5 years, they would have had a much better outcome in the sale to our organization. They would have got a much better multiple. So I wanted to see those people succeed. So those are the kind of clients that I work with. And the model that all of my clients work with me on, it's an advisory board plus mentoring, basically. Often it starts as an advisory board of one, Sean Steele, and the chair of their advisory board, but it's just me. And then as we get some of the groundwork in place, we often need to bring in specialists because I obviously don't know everything either. And so we bring other people into the advisory board format as and when we need to make sure that that founder can knock over their strategic problems that they've got for the next 90 days or 12 months or whatever it is, and they can just keep moving forward. They can keep focused on the business and keep gaining traction, and they never get stuck or paralyzed or plateau because they don't actually have the knowledge. So my job is to make sure the knowledge comes to the table so they can knock those hurdles over.
Beautiful, mate. Fantastic. And look, if anybody's listening or watch this, mate, and they want to get in touch to have a conversation around how you could help them, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Best way to reach me is probably just to email me or hit me up on LinkedIn with a direct message. My email is sean@scalehq.com.au, and on LinkedIn you'll find me at Sean Steele or via ScaleHQ on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way.
Beautiful. We'll include those links in the show notes. I'm sure this has been phenomenal. You've shared a lot of pearls of wisdom here. And guys, this is the key, right? As you're growing and scaling a business beyond 7 figures, you cannot just be a technician anymore. You need to get out of working in the business and trading time for money. And this requires you to go into creating a company, an entity that can exist without you. And that requires you to go through evolutions. And you need the support, you need the education, you need someone like Sean in your corner who can help you add those skills, add the right strategy, and then take the right actions to shortcut your path to success. So remember, a good idea in theory remains exactly that, just a good idea until you put it into practice. So go and implement some stuff you've listened to on the show, and hopefully it will bear fruit for you. Sean, appreciate you making the time, mate, and looking forward to catching up again soon.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Jackson. Cheers.
Thanks, mate.
The team here at Scale HQ hope you've enjoyed today's episode. Now, if you want to achieve scale, but you want to know what's going to hold you back, we can help. Head over to scalehq.com.au/growth score to get your free 9-page growth score report. That's going to help you understand where your top 3 barriers are to scale. And if you'd like, we'll even do a free debrief on the report for you with no obligations or expectations, just lots of value from some CEOs who've scaled to help you on your journey. That's scalehq.com.au/growth score. And find out what's holding you back from fulfilling the potential of your business today.